Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. If I continue to wake up early like this, then I think this is when our news video will come in. Is at like 6:20 in the morning, and before anyone's like, "Oh, that's not early," uh, you know, it depends on your job, and it depends on when you go to sleep. Um, as someone who can normally wake up at 7 and be on time for work, uh, the average has slowly gone back. One day it was 6:45. 2 or 3 days it stayed at that time, and now it's right at about 6 o'clock. So we'll see how productive that we can be following this. Uh, but there was a couple things in the news that I wanted to discuss. Uh, El Paso's shut their airspace. One article I read said for 10 days. One said for security reasons. Uh, and when it first came out, a bunch of people kind of thought it had something to do with the Nancy Guthrie stuff. Uh, because we had heard that, the investigation's moving into Texas. Uh, I read one thing saying, her kidnappers, and, they might not even be in the country. Um, and, I was like, okay, well, maybe this whole thing will be over soon. Because as a, you know, normal human being that has morals and stuff, you can feel bad for what's going on. Uh, I think it's based on the daughter's profile that any of us are hearing about it. You're a semi-famous person, so we care about you and your family. That's one thought. But it did come out later that it was closed because Mexican drones. They did say the word plural. So anything between two and infinite. Back up, cat. Uh, flew into U.S. airspace. Uh, they did determine that it was Mexican cartel. Uh, whatever that means. I guess I'm only kind of curious on why it takes 10 days to shut down the airport. Unless, I'm not saying I'm completely for it. But for a very long time, we've done drone strikes. We've had incursions into several Middle Eastern countries. And, just my theory, Venezuela was a practice run. Kind of test the public waters. And I think they figured out what they wanted to figure out. You know, almost everyone on the right was like, hell yeah, brother. And a decent number of people on the left were like, we're okay with this. Because, I think the right did a little bit of a better job. And it's recent enough. Uh, because Moderno, he, I think it was 2014. I'd have to look it up again. Uh, that he, you know, mysteriously wins the election, and almost the whole world is like, hey, you should step down. But when you're in charge of the military and they're going to follow you, that's why he stayed in charge. But so we go in, we get the guy, and my short time in the military says that was pretty darn close to like an expert, uh, everything goes right kind of thing. Um, I think the only thing, I gotta rinse my bowl. I think the only thing that would make it cooler, and I think in this situation that we can't, is, I was in high school during Obama's second re-election. Shows you how old and young I am. And, if you remember, we were playing hide and seek with a certain individual that caused a lot of damage here in the U.S., ruined thousands of lives. The Bin Laden guy. I think it was done 100%, now thinking about it, for political reasons. I think it was like a October surprise kind of thing. But I think it was if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that was kind of a October surprise, if you will. Like, I think it came out weeks before the election. But it was a 45 hour and 15 minute like documentary thing, talking about how they went to go find Bin Laden, and I mean they name drops some people, mostly CIA people and like federal government kind of people that knew general knowledge. But then we got a fairly good POV of the actual raid. Like, they basically turned on the body cameras of probably the most important raid in U.S. history. But them showing us this in real time was a very wild thing to do. Uh, and, you know, credit is where credit is due. You know, Bush said we're going to get this guy. Obama mentioned we're going to get this guy. Um, and you can, bet your bottom dollar that if we got him in, you know, let's say 2018, Trump would have said something about how, kick ass the military is, and, he'd get praised for it. I think that, that probably helped with the re election, at least some. Um, so I mention all that because I could foresee some drone operations in the future with Mexico. Um, I kind of think we do it in the Middle East because they're so far away, and generally speaking, most people are okay with it. And it's one of those things where, like, who's going to tell us no? I mean, they're telling us no. And we haven't done it with, a place like Mexico because it's right there. Very conventional warfare stuff could start to happen if we started to do that. One of our greatest military defenses of all times is the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. And that would be a situation where that's not the case. And in some ways, I kind of think, that could turn into our next, Vietnam-esque scenario. Because it's not so much, you get rid of enough people, the enemy side surrenders. It is a multi-billion-dollar business that, you take out certain key people, maybe it gets sloppy for a while because a younger person, less experienced, comes in and takes charge, and they have to slowly, build up their experience. You could get rid of 100% of the people involved in it. And it's, new people are going to get involved with it. It is probably a multi-decade approach to want to get rid of Mexican cartels. Get rid of any cartels. Get rid of gangs. Their membership goes up and down. And when a lot of money is involved, there's probably plenty of people in the U.S. that would have some sort of issue with it because they're involved in some sort of way. I also think the PR on it would, just massively tank any good thing going on. Which, I think one side does a much better job of, convincing their people and independence of their, PR campaign. We'll see. I think they closed it yesterday. Yesterday's when all the new stuff came out about it. So, I'll check at work, and we look at the news for my history class, and we'll see if there's any new pressing stuff going on with that. I did see where a statement was released. They're talking about Alabama and South Carolina. South Carolina, there were 650, illegal immigrants arrested in a 2 week period. You're not hearing anything about it on the news because the local police force was cooperating in, this crackdown. You can be, critical or supportive of removing immigrants, uh, specifically ones that aren't supposed to be here. The U.S. has done this several times. We have cut immigration. We've put in quotas. We've said no people coming in at this point. We've said a certain number at this point. And, it's just one of those things where, the majority of people said yes to it. I don't want ice right now from my ice maker. Uh, we're going to stay fairly neutral politically on this. Um, there's parts that I can be critical of going on right now, and there's parts that I can say, yeah, I'm fine with that. Like there was, a bunch of people were talking about the manufacturing jobs and just the job creation in general. Um, I praised the last administration for putting a bunch of money into chip manufacturing. And I did it mostly because it is something that is a several year, billions and billions of dollar investment. Uh, the last administration basically got the ball rolling on 10 factories that are going to take anywhere from 7 to 10 years to build, have people trained, and they're churning these things out. I kind of think of it from a lot of my prepping. The wife is really excited about planting another pear tree and getting 2 peach trees. That is a multi-year investment because my one peach tree, I still don't have peaches yet. It's survived the last 2 or 3 years, and hopefully before I'm 30, I will start to see a return on that investment. I also know planting these 3 more trees, I would almost like before I'm 40 that I have a good return on investment there. Some stuff, really want the chicken soon. Their ROI is much quicker. The stuff that's planted in the garden every year, that ROI is much quicker. But, this stuff takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. So, some of this, I really think we need to take a step back, see the work that has been put in, and then we will start to see, that results are happening. They're just, it's not something that someone says, hey, this thing's gonna happen. And, 5 months later, hey, the thing we talked about, it's happening. So, I talk about this now. There might be something to talk about it in a week or in 3 months. Or, it'd be nice to look back, 3 years from now and say, hey, that thing that I talked about at the beginning of 2026, we have reach the conclusion of that thing. Let me know your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this kind of stuff. Like the video if you learned something. Dislike it if you think it's dumb. And share it with a friend or family member. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.